Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome to Nightlight, everybody. Thank you for joining me and sharing your evenings with me. I have to thank Ken Quiethawk for my intro. You can find him at nativestorytellers.com, and that's a site that everybody should take a look and listen to because it's an amazing site. I have a great guest tonight. I have Tim Swartz with me, and he is an Emmy Award-winning television producer, videographer, and is the author of many books, including The Lost Journals of Nikola Tesla, America's Strange and Supernatural History, Secret Black Projects, Evil Agenda of the Secret Government, Time Travel, a how-to guide, Richard Shaver, Reality of the Inner Earth, and Admiral Byrd's Secret Journey Beyond the Poles, which is what we're going to be talking about tonight. As a photojournalist, he has traveled extensively and investigated paranormal phenomena and other unusual mysteries from such diverse locations as the Great Pyramid in Egypt to the Great Wall in China. He's worked with television networks such as, I love this, PBS, ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, ESPN, Thames TV, and the BBC. And he's also appeared on the History Channel's program Ancient Aliens and the History Channel Latin America series. It's in Spanish, but I'm going to translate it for you. It's Contact of Extraterrestrials. As well, Tim is the writer and editor of the online newsletter Conspiracy Journal, a free weekly email newsletter considered essential reading by paranormal researchers worldwide. And then, in his spare time, he is also the host of the webcast program Exploring the Bizarre, heard Thursday nights at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on KCORradio.com. That's a cool station, too. You should check that one out. So, welcome to the show, Tim. I'm so glad you could join me.
Well, I thank you, Barbara. It's a real pleasure to be back with you again.
Yeah, no, well, you've written such fascinating books, it's hard to stay away, to be honest with you.
Well, thank you.
I mean, you've hit on a number of my favorite topics, and of course, Admiral Byrd's journey and the concept of hollow Earth is something that has fascinated me forever, and I've researched it, and of course your book goes well beyond just Admiral Byrd's journey. You talk about the concept of hollow Earth and how it's been around for a gazillion years, and I think most people don't understand that this is something that is not new. It's been in our history, in our legends, as long as we've had legends.
Yeah, it's funny how right now you have really a lot of people. It surprises me how many people believe that the Earth is flat, yet you bring up the notion that the world could be hollow, and you're met with just really incredulous looks. Of course, I suppose to be honest, it's the same looks that I give somebody who suggests with a straight face that the Earth is flat. But and
Yeah.
I suppose that if you believe that the Earth is flat, then there's no way it could be hollow.
Well, that's true. Unless you folded it. If you folded it, it would be at least a tube.
There you go. And I say, oh no, you're gonna start a whole new meme now. It's the Earth isn't round, it isn't flat, it's a tube.
I mean, and people may laugh at that, but something, stranger things have happened. So,
yeah, that's true.
I think somebody was talking about the Antichrist and describing him, and I said, well, if they were really going to mess with your head, I think the Antichrist should be a woman. And I stopped the person dead in their tracks. So you never know. You never know.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
It's kind of, when we make up our mind that something can't possibly happen or be, it's really hard to backpedal. So I kind of leave everything open. I'm not sure, but convince me. I'm open to listening. So
there you go. There you go. I like that. That's a good attitude.
And it's really when you read your book and you read all of the different theories and the absolutely sane people that are explaining them, it's hard to not. And when you think past history and all of the ancient cultures that have talked about being saved by the people from below, or at one point, I forget which Indian tribe it was, but they said that they were taken beneath the surface by the ant people and saved.
Yeah.
And so those stories, those histories, those tidbits have been in history for so long that to my mind, there has to be some truth to it.
If you do your homework and research all of the different creation mythologies from the past, the majority of them seem to be divided into two schools of thought. One of them was that mankind came from the stars, or mankind emerged from underneath the earth. Of course, most of these mythologies, mankind had help, by some sort of deity or deities. But we either came from the stars or we came from underneath the planet. So I just always found that extremely fascinating. Now, to me, it really made sense to think that we may have come from the stars, but it surprised me somewhat when I was doing my original research in all this, the concept that we may have emerged from some kind of underground world. But there are just so many different past civilizations that really took that to heart and built very rich mythologies around that concept, and a lot of that carried on into historical times. Now, the majority of these mythologies that I'm talking about came before really, as far as we know, people had developed writing. So this would have been basically word of mouth, handed down from generation to generation stories. But I mean, we still have with us today stories from some of the native Inuits that they still tell that their ancestors came from the north, which is surprising because they're already about as far north as you can get. But they claim that their ancestors came from even further north, from a land where the sun never set, where it was perpetual daylight. You have some of the first and civilizations, societies, I suppose, cultures would probably be a better word, that developed in the Middle East. And you have these stories of the first people who came from caverns, where the sky goddess and an earth god would make love, and then the offspring would have been mankind, and they emerged from caverns or holes in the ground. And you look all over the planet, and there's all types of different variations on this theme, but they all pretty much tell kind of like the same story. You know, maybe the names have been changed. The gods and goddesses involved may have different faces, but basically you're talking about the same kind of stories. You know, that mankind, the first people who populated the planet, came from underground, and sometimes there's an elaboration where they actually describe what the land underground was like, and a lot of times you get the same kind of stories of a perpetual daylight, an almost paradise type of existence. A land rich and abundant in plant and animal life, which makes you wonder why they left that to come to the surface world. Go ahead.
Well, after reading your book, I have a spiritual background, and spiritualists believe that when you die, you go to a place called Summerland, where the sun never sets, and it's kind of like paradise. And, that's kind of where you rest up before you come back for another run at being a physical entity. And after reading your book, I can see how I'm not sure I buy the hollow earth, but I do buy, or I would be very, very open to the fact that at each pole there is a portal to another dimension.
And it's interesting that you would say that, because with the exception of some of the the stories from the Inuits, and then there were a few stories that say like the ancient Greeks. And it's odd because there's the ancient Greeks, and then you had some of the Celtic tribes who described a land to the far north. Some attributed to the name was it High Brazil, and then there were some other names, but it was kind of the same situation where apparently there was some kind of entranceway to in the far north that would take you to the underground kingdom. Now, it wasn't really until the late 18th and early 19th century that this kind of gained, a new a lease on life, and you had some scientists actually talking about this, that it could actually be real, that there could actually have been, or not have been, but there were actually physical openings in the North and South Pole that would lead to the inner Earth. I mean, you had Edmund Halley. Was one of the earlier ones, the guy who was the first to plot the orbits of comets. It was one of his favorite theories that the Earth, not only was it hollow, but it was kind of like a Russian nesting doll, that there were a number of smaller spheres inside the planet, and that and then there was the possibility that each of these spheres were habitable. Now, what was interesting is that he came up with this theory because of the way the Earth's magnetic field has a tendency to travel around, especially the magnetic north.
It
it's never at the same place. I mean, it's right now. I think it's moving to the east at feet a day, which I mean that's pretty fast. So it was his theory that this was because of all of these different smaller spheres underneath our feet as they were rotating and wobbling around. But again, you could access these supposedly by the polar openings. Now, you talked about how this could be a spiritual types of portals or openings almost. There was a gentleman by the name of T. Lob Singh Rampa. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Yes, I am.
He wrote a series of books, and unfortunately, there's a lot of people have forgotten about him nowadays. But especially in the 50s and 60s, he was really popular, and he wrote a book first called The Third Eye, and he claimed that he was a Tibetan monk, and that he had been raised in Nepal, Tibet, Nepal, in a Buddhist monastery. And one of his stories, he talks about how he was taken to the underground kingdom of Agartha, but that when he made his underground journey, starting from a cavern system in the Himalayas, he actually went through a portal, for want of a better word, almost like a window in one of these underground caverns that took him to and I'm going to put quotation marks around this, took him to the hollow earth. But the way that he said it actually was that this was a location that could be gotten to from other window areas across the universe, so that it wasn't necessarily located within our planet, but could be located in every planet. I don't know if that makes sense, but but he said that when you go underground and go through this window area, and it's almost like your concept that that this may have taken take you to like the Summerland, or the afterlife, and that was almost the way that he was putting it, that you weren't actually at a physical location underneath the earth, but it took you almost to like another a plane of reality, or another dimension, so to speak. So I mean you have all of these different concepts throughout history, not only of the possibility of a physical hollow earth, but of a interdimensional, spiritual, astral plane. The sky's the limit.
Oh, yeah, I did a long time, a couple of years ago. I was working with Bill Brown, who's an Egyptologist, and he had a map of places on the Giza Plateau that he wanted to investigate, and we talked about, how would he know where to dig and stuff like that. And I said, well, why don't you just astral travel there? And he said, do you know how to do that? And so I put together a group of about 70 people all around the world, and what I did was we did several meditations online, and I took people out of body into different venues, and always it seemed that we would go into a tunnel system of some sort that had access to portals to different realms, to different dimensions. And
Mm-hmm.
if anybody's interested, on my website there's there's a blog for the meditations that we did, and you can listen to the meditation, go along with it, and there's material there that tells you about that particular place. We did pyramids all over the world, and it was fascinating, the material that we got. And I think part of it is a lot of this material you have to be to a level of consciousness that allows you to move into another realm. And once you are at that place, all things are possible, and it's fascinating, because I mean, you even have stuff from the Bible that talks about inner Earth, which I found fascinating.
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, you look into the whole biblical concept of Sheol. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Sheol, what we would now call hell, which is the an underground a place almost infinite in size, where all the bad souls go to be punished. And of course, you look at the ancient mythologies of take a look at Greece. The Greek mythologies, everybody went to Hades. It didn't matter if you were good or bad, you went to Hades, which was located underground. So, I mean, here you have these fascinating religious connections with some kind of underground location, whether it be actually, like I said, whether it be actually a physical location or some kind of spiritual place. But there is this undeniable connection that humanity has with these underground kingdoms, and modern society seems to have forgotten it somewhat, but it still emerges. In our consciousness from time to time, with stories like the Hollow Earth, or Richard Shaver and his Deros, and the an antediluvian civilization that moved underground just before cataclysm struck the planet millions of years ago. The whole UFO mystery has had its Hollow Earth connection. So, I mean, here we are in the 21st century, yet the Hollow Earth is still within our pop culture.
Well, when they say, as I can't remember how many hundreds of miles the crust is thick before you get to Hollow Earth, but we've never even drilled down that far to know if there is a Hollow Earth or not. I mean,
I'm trying to remember. It's supposed to be about 500 to 1,000 miles, something like that, right before you get before you get to the Hollow Earth. I mean, we supposedly we do now have the benefit of using earthquakes and seismic readings to be able to tell the different densities of the crust, and what happens when these waves go from one location through the planet and come out onto the other side. However, we're just making guesses on what these readings come up with, the certain kinds of densities. I know one scientist told me one time that because a lot of the Hollow Earth theories involves not only do you have a a void basically in the center of the planet, in which the underside of this void could actually, be habitable, with land and an atmosphere and seas and things like that. But at the exact center of this void would be a small sun, but it wouldn't be a sun like a celestial sun. It's not a ball of hydrogen and plasma. Instead, it could be exactly what we're expecting the center of the Earth to have. It could be a ball of compressed nickel and iron and heated to a fantastic degree. And the gentleman, and he's a very well known geologist, told me this. He says it's entirely possible that this is the case. That the readings that we get that show different densities at certain depths could be actually a gaseous atmosphere till finally you get to the center, where there would be this extremely dense and hot nickel iron ball. So he said the concept, as it's been proposed, of a hollow Earth with a center sun, may not be outside the realm of impossibility. Of course, he was just speculating, but saying that the Earth is solid all the way down is still just speculation as well. And I know that there, if there are any scientists and geologists, who are listening, they're probably, gnashing their teeth saying, no, we know exactly what's there. But you don't. Nobody does.
No.
It's like you said, we've only been able to manage to drill down. Oh, and I can't remember. The Soviet Union, I think, has the record of how far down that they were able to drill.
But they had to
really
stop because it got too hot.
It got too hot, and the pressure, it got too deep, which is why, a lot of people said, well, then see, that proves that, the Earth, couldn't be hollow. And, again, it's difficult to say because we've never been any further down than, say, 10 miles. I don't even know if they managed to get that far down, but, let's just say 10 miles, below the crust. So, after you get past a certain point, who knows, what you're going to run into. Now, as for my own personal ideas, I'm kind of like you, Barbara. I mean, I try to, I try to leave my belief systems open for any possibilities because, you don't want to get too wrapped up in your own personal beliefs and bias, because if you're then presented with new evidence, a lot of times you refuse to look at that new evidence because you've already convinced yourself that such and such is already true. And as we well know, information is constantly changing. It wasn't that long ago that people didn't believe that rocks could fall from the sky.
Oh, yeah.
And now we know they do. It wasn't that long.
I've definitely learned to not say absolutely anything because
right.
As soon as you make that declaration, something happens and you look foolish. So it's I have learned over time to never say never, and to always be open to show me, teach me, inform me, because I have opinions, but they constantly change. So I'm open to be swayed. And you have a picture, you have a graphic in your book that is of the South Pole, that is of the Aurora Borealis, I think, but it's an absolute circle directly over the South Pole. And what an amazing piece of evidence for there's a hole here. I mean, it's an amazing.
That's an interesting picture.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because for the most part, I'm not too sure whether or not I am a believer in the what's they're referred to as Symes polar openings, because he was one of the first modern researchers. And when I say modern, I mean I think he lived in the early 1800s. But he was one of the first in modern times to suggest that there was actually physical polar openings. But from what we know now about the North and the South Poles, the North especially, because it's completely covered, at least for the time being, in water and ice, the likelihood that there's a physical opening into the hollow Earth in the North Pole, I'm not quite too sure about that. Antarctica, however, there is some locations where, as you pointed out in that picture, where it looks like that there is some kind of aurora type of activity that is emerging from some type of opening there. Now this could be a location that is most of the time covered in ice, and then periodically some way gets uncovered. I don't know. Again, I've never been there, so I can't tell you for sure. I've seen satellite very good satellite photos, and despite what people say, I don't believe that there is some kind of conspiracy to keep the polar openings in the hollow Earth hidden from us, because that's the same kind of stuff that believers in the flat Earth say, that the flat Earth is being kept from us by the power elite for whatever reason. And
I have.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I have read that the North Pole, absolutely, I don't believe there's any land there, but on the South Pole there is a continent there. So and I know that I read somewhere, and don't ask me where, because I read a lot and I'm not sure where it came from. I'm pretty sure it wasn't a garbage newspaper, though, that there is a lake of some sort on the South Pole that people are forbidden to fly over, which leads one to ask why. But we'll get to the South Pole in a few minutes, because that is again another one of my fascinations here. But your book on Admiral Byrd and his secret journey beyond the pole fascinates me, because Admiral Byrd was probably, he was a phenomenally stable man. So when he really stable, military, so that to a degree, so that this is not a man who has flights of fancy, and I don't believe that he had any mental conditions or anything like that, and yet he opened up a whole can of worms that took our government in a whole other direction. You want to explain? I just love stories like this, and why history hasn't really expanded upon it. He had a journal. He kept a journal, and they have the journal. I do have one question, though. On most of his flights, he had another person with him. These weren't singular journeys. Has anybody ever talked to the other guy that was sitting next to him? Does he confirm the story?
Well, the story that you are referring to came from a book that was first published in the 1950s, and it's known under several names, like Admiral Byrd's Secret Diary, Admiral Byrd's Lost Diary. It actually started out as what was called a samizdat, which is, it wasn't officially published, but it was being printed and reprinted and then distributed basically by hand and mail. So somebody would print it, using like a Xerox or mimeograph or whatever types of copying machines that were available at the time, and would then send it to somebody else, and they would do the same, and send it on. And then somewhere along the lines, somebody actually had it officially published. At some point, Timothy Green Beckley actually was able to buy the rights to publish the full book and get it widely distributed. Before that time, it was mostly just small independent publishers who I don't even think that they even had managed to get copyrights for this. But this diary was alleged to have been Byrd's note log or log book from when he made an airplane flight over the North Pole in 1947. And he did have a navigator and a radio operator with him. When I say navigator and radio operator, one person served both of those roles. And the story goes that while making this flight, that they were accosted by a group of UFOs, disc-shaped objects that he actually remembered that they had swastika insignias on them, which, in 1947, he would notice this quite a bit. So they received a radio signal from these crafts that they were instructed to follow them. And when they followed them, they were actually taken to an area that nobody had ever flown over before, and and he alleged in this diary that they flew into a great chasm, which took them underground to the Hollow Earth. Not very far. Their plane could only go so far, but that they were taken to a city, and in this city they met with the leaders of this place, and they were given a message. And it's amazing because this if you had inserted taken away the Hollow Earth aspects of it and put, say, like Venus or Mars or something like that, the story reads very much like some of the early Contactee books from, say, like George Adamski and Howard Menger. That at that time, but they were basically told that mankind was fooling around with atomic weapons, and that we better stop it, because not only could these atomic weapons destroy the surface world, but it wouldn't be too good for those who lived in the Hollow Earth as well, and that if we didn't stop it, then they would come up and stop it for us. And so, I mean, you're left with the impression that while this was a friendly chat, that it wasn't quite, the message wasn't so friendly. If you get what I'm saying, that these people that were talking to Byrd were appeared nice, but left him with the feeling that if we didn't clean up our act up here, then they would come up with a mop and bleach and really clean it up for us. And then they refueled his airplane and escorted him back out again, and allowed him to come back with his message for mankind. Now that I've described this story to you, the interesting thing about this is that at the same time that Byrd claimed that he had made this journey in 1947 in the Arctic, in reality, he was nowhere near the Arctic. He was actually in Antarctica, involved in a United States operation called Highjump. So he was at on the completely different pole at that time. So we're left wondering what really happened. You have some people who say that, well, Byrd actually wasn't with Operation Highjump. That he was supposed to be there, but actually he was making this secret journey over the North Pole. But I haven't found any evidence that that is the case. As far as I can tell, and there is film that was taken, lots of film that was taken during Operation Highjump, which took place from August 1946 and ended in late February 1947. And his journey to the North Pole was allegedly took place in early February 1947. So what my theory is, and I've taken a lot of heat from people who really want to believe that Byrd actually traveled into the Hollow Earth at the North Polar opening, but I think that the Lost Diary of Admiral Byrd and the whole Hollow Earth story, at least that aspect of it, is disinformation to cover up what actually was going on with Operation Highjump. Whatever was happening in Antarctica ended up being so controversial that somebody along the lines came up with this story of Admiral Byrd flying into the Hollow Earth and given this this secret message from the Hollow Earth people, because whatever was going on in Antarctica may have been so startling, maybe even so frightening, that this was something that needed to be covered up. And what better way to cover up? What better way to cover it up than by giving it really a fantastic story that sounds a little too wild to believe.
Well, it also kind of destroyed his career to a degree. I mean, with this kind of stuff coming out, making him look like, the government told him not to say anything about it or not to talk about it, and he didn't, obviously.
He did a little bit. Yeah, he did a little bit though, which may have made it worse for him, because Operation Highjump, and you have to remember, this was a huge operation.
Involved. Let's give some background to why Operation Highjump happened.
Well, see, that's part of the controversy.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, let's get into that, because I mean, that to me, again, is another area that is just so fascinating. It's you could do hours and hours and hours on it, but for those people that don't understand why the South Pole was so important for us to go down and investigate and try to do stuff, so why was the South Pole so fascinating?
Well, and that's what we're really not too sure about. Operation Highjump, which was officially titled the United States Navy Antarctic Development Program, involved, it had over 4,500 men, 13 ships, 33 aircraft. There was even a submarine involved. And you have to remember, this started in 1946. World War II had just ended. The Navy was actually in the process of decommissioning a lot of ships. And then all of a sudden, here this great big huge Navy project was brought up. Ships were brought, they were taken out of mothballs. You had all of these men, a lot of them who were all set to go home, but instead they were given this new commission to go to Antarctica. I mean, this was something that was completely unheard of, considering the time that it took place. It was said that this was going to be a project, first of all, to look for minerals and resources in Antarctica, and also to help train men or to come up with new ways to train the military on how to deal with the possibility that the Soviet Union could attack the Western Hemisphere by coming over the northern polar regions. Now then, now that I say that, if that was the case, why go all the way to Antarctica when you had Alaska? Heck, even Canada would have allowed United States military to do training, in their Arctic regions. So why go all the way to Antarctica for some kind of training exercise with all of those men, all of those ships, all of that money being used, when you could have done it just as easy a lot closer to home? Now, the military's response to that was, well, we did not want to get the Soviet Union all excited and suspicious by us doing that, which that really doesn't make much sense either. So we're left with this huge operation going down to Antarctica, and for the idea that they were looking for mineral and resources, there was never any kind of evidence that they came back with anything of any use along those lines. They visited an area that Admiral Byrd was already familiar with, by the way. He had an Antarctic research base there years before. So we're left with this puzzle on why this huge Navy task force was sent down to Antarctica at this particular time, and it was supposed to last a lot longer. It was supposed to go, and you have to remember that August through January, February, and March. That is the summer down there. So the weather was supposed to be fairly as nice as it can be. I suppose there. But after they got there, and it took them a while to get there. Once they got there, they were there only a matter of a few weeks before they suddenly just packed up and came back home. They left about, I think they were supposed to have at least 2 months left in this operation, but for some reason they turned around and quickly came back. Now there were reporters that were stationed on these ships from various Central and South American newspapers, and Admiral Byrd told them as they were on their way back that he had to address Congress because he said that what they discovered down there worried him because he was afraid that the United States was going to be attacked, and this is how he put it, by I'm trying to make sure I got this right now, by enemy missiles coming over the poles. That's the way that he put it. And when he got back, he addressed a small committee of congressmen in a secret hearing. It's in the congressional record that he addressed this small committee, but there's no record of exactly what he told them. And then after that, it's like you said, his career was basically over with. There was never any official reprimands or anything like that, but from what happened to him afterwards, he basically was retired from that point on. And we're still left today wondering. And there's all kinds of fascinating theories. I mean, I addressed a number of them in several of my books, but we really don't know just exactly what happened down there, what they were looking for, why they turned around and came back so quickly, and what it was that Byrd told Congress that worried him so much.
Well, the one theory that I have heard that I think there has to be some credence to is that the Nazi Party had a base down there, and
yes,
they were worried that it was being developed to sort of be a jumping off place for Hitler to make another go at trying to dominate the world.
The British actually had a smaller expedition earlier in 1946, in the spring of 1946, to Antarctica, and they were looking for what was supposed to be a secret Nazi base that had been established during World War II. And they had heard rumors that a number of Nazi personnel, scientists, intelligence officers, supplies, and the like, had been transferred to this secret Nazi base. The British expedition down there was hampered by extremely bad weather, so they did not they were not successful. But I think that apparently because of whatever it was that they thought was going on down there, they let the United States know, and I think that is probably one of the major reasons that Operation Highjump took place. That they were looking for some kind of Nazi enclave there. Now, you also have to remember that at the end of World War II, a number of Nazi U-boats surrendered in Argentina. And a couple of them, the captains were interrogated by the OSS, the precursor to the CIA, and they told the Americans that they had first stopped in Antarctica to drop off supplies and personnel before they surrendered in Argentina. So I think that Operation Highjump was a mission to look for something going on in by the Nazis. Whether or not the Nazis actually had as big a base as they said they did, because I mean we now know that a majority of top-ranking Nazis and scientists actually went to South America. They may have got their start, though, in Antarctica, and because who wants to live in Antarctica? You know, even in a fairly nice base of operations, I think that possibly they eventually made their way to South America. But that early on, 1946, 47, there could very well have been a very well established Nazi base in Antarctica. Why else would the United States, using a well-known expert of polar expeditions, like Admiral Byrd, to man this huge operation to go to Antarctica, and then to turn around and leave as quickly as they did?
To me, first of all, I absolutely believe that the Nazis had some sort of camp there of some sort that was under the ice, that was heated by geophysical whatevers, and because even of late they are discovering huge caverns under the ice several miles down that are obviously they're natural, but they're there, and it would make great sense that if you could get a submarine in there safely and out safely, it would be a perfect place to do all sorts of research and stuff like that. And I mean, the SS and the Thule Society and all of them, they truly believed that they were a master race and that they were going to take over the world. And so come on, we had soldiers in jungles, Japanese soldiers in jungles that came out 10 years, 15 years later that still thought the war was going on.
Right. So, yeah, in some of these Pacific islands and in the Philippines.
Yeah, so I don't find it hard to believe that a conclave of some sort survived for a great deal of time. Now, I know that from what I've read and what I've seen and things they've had on TV and stuff, that there was a huge population of German officers that were in South America, even possibly Hitler, so that what our newspapers have told us, for whatever the reason, at the time they knew that they didn't have Hitler's body, but they still said that they had found it. But in all the reports that I have seen, they flat out said that they couldn't identify the body as being Hitler's. So it's very clear that he made it out of Germany. So that being said, I guess it would have panicked the world if they knew that he had escaped. I guess they had to kill him off just to put an end to everything. But it does make you wonder, what our government does and doesn't let us know. We're not well informed really about almost anything because they just don't give us the truth, or all of the truth. They give us part of the truth.
Well, now here is another interesting Hollow Earth connection with all of this, with Operation Highjump, and the possibility of a secret Nazi base in Antarctica. It's well known. I mean, and anybody who ever watched the first Indiana Jones movies knows that Hitler was very interested in getting a hold of religious objects under the belief, under the occult Spear of Destiny. There, some other things as well, under the belief that the government who owned these objects of religious power would be able to use occult methods to control the planet. Well, because of this, there were a number of expeditions, German expeditions, that were sent all across the planet to search for entranceways into the Hollow Earth. The belief was and this was based on some of these early mythologies that we talked about at the beginning of the program. But Germany had some of these early like Teutonic types of legends where the first Aryan race emerged from this underground paradise, Agartha, or whatever you want to call it, Thule, and all kinds of different names, and that the Germans, the pure-blooded Germans, the Aryans, were the direct descendants from this master race that they believe still lived underground. And so these expeditions were set out to look for these entranceways, to try to find these Aryan masters, and to forge an alliance to help the Germans and the Nazis conquer the planet. Tibet. There were a number of expeditions sent to Tibet, South America. I mean, there are lots and lots of ancient tunnel systems throughout Central and South America that lead. There's a lot of them that we still don't know exactly where they lead to. Some of them have collapsed over the years. Others, people have tried to go into them, but never come back. And some of these, couple of these expeditions also went to Antarctica, because there were stories from some of the early German scientific expeditions to Antarctica that they had discovered, and it's like you said, they had discovered these caverns that were heated by geothermal hot springs, and you had like these beautiful underground lakes and possibly even areas on the surface, kind of like some of these movies that you've seen where they've discovered, like the hidden valleys where the dinosaurs still lived. Well, a lot of those stories and pop culture references came from these rumors that such places existed in Antarctica, and so the Germans went there in search of these places, and there is the possibility that this secret base actually utilized these kinds of areas, these hot springs, those vast caverns, either within mountains or like ice caverns that were created in the thick ice, or maybe a combination of the two. And so, of course, by the end of the war, the rumor mill had been circulating for quite some time that at least one of these expeditions in search of a entrance into the Hollow Earth had been successful, and this was from Antarctica. And I think that when the British especially were able to intercept some of these transmissions coming from these German U-boats that were leaving, say, South Africa, some of these ports in South Africa, on their way to Antarctica, was the reason that they attempted their first expedition to Antarctica, and then later got the help, or not the help, but actually, convinced the United States to do an expedition of their own.
Well, there's also it is common knowledge that Hitler used a psychic called Maria Orszak. I think that's how you say her last name. That was talking about communicating with alien cultures, and that the base in Antarctica was developing their own form, their own design of UFOs. And yes.
No, continue.
So that it's something that often I have wondered about, because there is such a plethora of UFO sightings and stuff. It makes one wonder: are they extraterrestrial, or are they ours, or are they another country's that has the same technology that we do, and the government just isn't letting us know that. Yeah, we have UFO, we have saucers of our own that we're working with, and so I'm wondering if the government is letting us panic about invasions from outer space when it's not outer space invasions, it's inner space invasions, and it's just that we've developed them, and so have other governments, and so we're seeing something that is of our own making, and yet our government hasn't let us know that it's us. Does that make sense?
Oh yes, definitely. Well, I was just going to say you did a much better job of pronouncing her name than I ever could. German trying to pronounce some of these German names has never been my strong suits. But as you said, that is another interesting story that surrounds this, because you're talking about some of these early occult groups like the Thule Society that actually emerged in the early 1920s. In Germany, Germany and Austria were where these groups actually emerged, and they used what we would now call like mediums or channelers to receive messages allegedly from extraterrestrials from a far-flung star system, and part of these messages involved basically scientific blueprints on how to construct a spacecraft, and as time went by, the Nazis, especially certain party members who had a close, who had Hitler's ear, were able to convince Hitler that these blueprints were workable, and so they actually took time and spent a lot of money to try and develop these crafts. Now, one of the interesting things about all this is that one of these mediums, and I can't remember which one because there were several, and they were always distinguished by their long hair. They couldn't cut their hair for some reason. But one of these mediums told them that the best place to construct and attempt to operate these crafts currently at that time would have been in Antarctica. And so that supposedly was one of the reasons that they went to Antarctica to build this base, was to try to build and test fly these crafts. Now, what's interesting is that the prominent members of the Thule Society, I guess, regretted working with the Nazis. At first, before I guess they realized just exactly what the brown shirts' intentions were with the rest of the planet, they were happy to work with them. But then as time went by, they weren't so happy, and some of the rumors that I've heard that they actually had, I guess, a secret wing of Nazis and scientists building their own spaceships because these mediums at some point disappeared and were never seen again. And it wasn't like, as far as we know, I mean, they weren't rounded up and taken to a concentration camp or anything like that, or, escaped to another country. No, these people just disappeared. And again, the rumor had it is that they had constructed their own ship and had left the planet. or went inside the planet, because there was also some of these alleged transmissions that they were getting were not only from a distant star system, but supposedly from a race from within the planet. Though this alien race from within the planet was actually, rather than it being the hollow Earth like we're talking about, was actually more of like a giant cavern system that crisscrossed across the globe. So it could have been that they made their escape underground. So here again, we have this fascinating connection with the hollow Earth. Starting, like I said, with this book, The Lost Diary of Admiral Byrd, then going to Operation Highjump, looking for possibly a Nazi secret base that was formed because the Nazis were looking for an entrance into the hollow Earth. I mean, you could make a movie out of all of this.
I'm
stories
pretty sure they
are
will.
just so good. Well, actually, they're. I don't know if they ever finished the production, but that there was a what was it? It was like from Sweden or Finland or someplace like that. A movie company actually, they made a movie called Iron Sky, which involved the Nazis had escaped in spaceships and had established a secret base on the moon, and then came back and invaded the planet. And it was kind of a like a tongue-in-cheek type of movie. It's very well done too. But they were working on a sequel where it was discovered that those that didn't go to the moon had actually gone to the hollow Earth.
Well, it doesn't. It's not that far a reach, because Werner von Braun, when asked about, the technology they were using, he literally just about said we had help from other sources, inferring that there was an extraterrestrial faction of some sort that was working with the Nazis, because they developed the jet engine before we did. They developed their rocket stuff was far superior than ours, and the scientists. I mean, look at Operation Paperclip. We took all their scientists, made them Americans, and set them to work here. I mean, go figure.
Well, I mean, we have these stories of the Thule Society who had come up with these blueprints allegedly for a spaceship, but you also have people like Nikola Tesla, who had worked for a number of years on his theories of fuel propulsion, or we'd call it anti-gravity now. But Tesla had developed some interesting ideas about using electricity and electromagnetism to basically create a lifting type of device that could have been used for aircraft. Unfortunately, when Tesla was working on these ideas and these theories, the technology at the time, he could only take them so far. You could be the greatest scientist in the world, but unless you have the technology to help you develop these ideas, that's all they're going to be is ideas. But by the late 1930s, the Nazis had a very well-established spy ring on the East Coast. And Tesla was very well known for never getting rid of any of his notes or writings. Actually, Tesla didn't write a lot of stuff down himself. It was his assistants who did. But still, Tesla had reams and reams of interesting scientific material scattered all across, especially New York. And more than likely, Hitler, who knew Tesla, knew of Tesla very well, and in fact had wanted to kidnap him at one point and bring him to Germany to work for him, got his spies to locate as much material as they could get their hands on from Tesla and bring it back to Germany. So I have no doubt that a lot of the technical progress, especially when it comes to the form of electromagnetic propulsion systems, came from this purloined Tesla material. And of course, Tesla was not in good health at that time, so he never noticed.
Well, I think also, though, I know they were working on anti-gravity stuff. They're the Glock, the Bell. They had,
yeah. Well, and a lot of that probably came from Tesla's work.
And then when Tesla finally passed away, and I don't think he passed away, I think he was knocked off. It's just my opinion, my gut feeling. Not all of his material was found. He had a certain number of trunks, and they all were not discovered.
Oh, it's we definitely know. Yeah, we definitely know that a lot of Tesla's material didn't make it into the hands of the United States government. When Tesla died, and you have to remember that he was living in a hotel called the New Yorker in Manhattan, and that there were FBI agents who were also living in the New Yorker to keep an eye on him. So the story that you may have heard over the years that Tesla had largely been forgotten about is not true. The United States government was well aware of Tesla, and Tesla, right up until the time he died, was still doing research and conducting experiments in a laboratory that he had established there in the New Yorker on one of the upper floors, probably with the help of the United States government.
Wasn't there some talk that building actually became a tower for generating energy or whatever? As I recall, it had something to do with the size of the building, the technology with which the building was constructed made it a perfect receptacle for him to have his experiments in, because it was able to pull the energy out of the air or whatever. There was something special about the building itself.
The way that the building was constructed, and there were antennas on top of the building. that could have been used both for reception and transmission of radio frequencies. But the main thing is that the New Yorker had a huge generator in the basement that to supply its own power if needed. Now the building used the electricity provided by New York City, but they had this huge generator on standby just in case something happened and they needed to fire it up. Well, it just so happened that this generator was the perfect size and had the perfect output for the type of especially the transmission of electricity using a radio frequency, something that Tesla had been working on for a number of years. This building was perfect for these kinds of experiments. Tesla had his secretary and basically the guy who helped Tesla with his correspondence and experiments and things like that in his later life, who'd been with Tesla for a number of years, wrote in his journal that a day or so before Tesla passed away, that the two of them were going to be conducting an experiment in Tesla's laboratory in the New Yorker, but Tesla wasn't feeling well, that they were going to have to postpone it. Unfortunately, the next day Tesla had passed away. So yes, Tesla was still perfectly capable of conducting these kinds of experiments. And as you had mentioned earlier, a lot of his material was taken by the United States government, a lot of it never to be seen again, but there was quite a bit of additional material that some other people who were associated with Tesla just happened to have after, before he died and after he died, nobody knew that they had it. The FBI released a number of documents a few years ago dealing with Tesla, and one of them was a letter by a woman who had, I guess, a number of trunkloads of Tesla material, and she was worried what she was going to do with it, because she was afraid that somebody was going to try to steal it and kill her to get it. But there was no record of any kind of response from the FBI. So who knows? After she wrote that, the poor thing may have had got a knock on the door from government agencies, asking for this stuff.
Well, I think one of the government's biggest problems with Tesla was that he wanted to give it all away. He didn't want to charge for it. He didn't want to weaponize it. He wanted to develop something that would be of benefit to humanity, not necessarily, make him a rich man, though a little extra money wouldn't have hurt.
Right.
So that he was also a rather, my inclination is to say quirky, but let's say unusual in his habits. He was very obsessive about simple things like eating and the same thing at the same time at the same day and things like that. So he was a little OCD, but he really was a humanist. He really wanted to give electricity away to the world. He didn't want to charge for it, and that's the reason they didn't pick his form of energy, because there was no way to put a meter on it and charge for it. So I would imagine that as he went forward with his work, with his studies, with his stuff, that I don't think that he ever was focused on making money. He was focused on doing things that would make the world a better place to live in, and of course our government didn't want that at all.
Tesla's interest in money was only as a source to continue his experiments and research. Now, you have to realize also that Tesla was also fond of living the good life. I mean, he was very cultured. He was very well educated. He enjoyed the arts, the theater. He liked a glass of whiskey every day because he felt that it was the key to a long life. But when it came to his experiments and his research being used as weapons of destruction, as weapons to attack rather than to defend, then yes, he was very much against that. Now, Tesla came up with a number of ideas to create weapons, but these would be weapons only to be used in defense, never to attack. Tesla came up with the idea of his, as they called it, his death ray, but actually it was a particle beam device. But that this was not to be, this couldn't be used to attack another country, but only to knock, say, like missiles or aircraft that were approaching your borders. And he was very much against the whole idea, naturally, of war. But he was a realist, and he realized that you couldn't just leave yourself undefended. So, I mean, his ideas when it came to these kinds of devices were always in the form of defensive weapons and never aggressive.
Yeah, I kind of, in a way, think, like Leonardo da Vinci, he was an anachronism, sort of really born in the wrong time for his mind. And if you put him ahead another 100 years, he probably would have fit right in, and hopefully, and been able to really utilize his skills and his talents. Looking at it from a spiritual point of view, he spent a great deal of time. There are pictures of him, in the center of this massive electrical stuff going all over the place, and kind of like taking a bath in the electrical stuff. And I think that electrical current in many ways helped him to get to a higher level of awareness than a lot of people. And this is not suggesting people should stick their finger in a socket to get, not suggesting that at all. But it feels to me as though he was the kind of person that would take that kind of energetic bath, and it would help to clear his consciousness to go to other levels of understanding. That's why, I believe, really talked about interdimensional stuff. He talked about time travel. He talked about certainly the anti-gravity stuff. So that all of that was more futuristic than the time really could take. In the 40s and the 30s, our culture just wasn't ready for that.
Well, it's amazing that all of the stuff that Tesla was able to accomplish in his life, because his first grand idea was the AC motor, which he came up with in the late 19th century. And he just progressed from there. I mean, the whole concept of radio, wireless radio, became. People have been working on it for quite a long time. But Tesla made it happen. Marconi actually was using devices that Tesla had already patented, remote control, the microwaves, X-rays. Tesla came up with fluorescent lights. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. So, I mean, to consider, and you're absolutely right. A lot of Tesla's ideas were hampered by the technology and the attitudes from other scientists at the time. You could come up with this great idea for, say, like an anti-gravity ship, but unless you have the technological knowledge and the material available to you to make that come true, then it's still just an idea in your head. Maybe, like you said, 100 years down the line, when technology catches up to you, you could make that a reality. So, if Tesla had been born, 100 years later, think of the amazing things that he would have been able to accomplish. However, with a mind like Tesla, no matter what era he lives in, he's still going to be hampered by his brain going faster than the technology or the scientific attitudes of that time are available to him. Now, when I say scientific attitudes...
Can you imagine what he would do with a collider? I mean,
yeah.
Yeah. How many patents did he have? Did he have a whole bunch, or?
Over 700.
Now, did he have any relatives? Did anybody benefit from any of that stuff?
Not really. No. His last living relative actually just passed away earlier this year. He would have been, what was his? It was like a great grandnephew, something along those lines. But Tesla, of course, never married, had children of his own. He had a brother and several sisters, but that was his closest relatives. But some of Tesla's most money-making patents, he actually, out of the kindness of his heart, sold them back because the company was, even though it had made millions and millions of dollars, had not, handled that money very well and was going out of business, or, they were almost on the verge of bankruptcy. Part of the reason was that part of the contract agreement was that out of so many kilowatts of electricity that was being generated, Tesla would get a certain amount of money, revenue from that. And I mean that was coming up to at that time, and like I said, we're talking about the late 19th, early 20th century. Probably about $1 million a year. That's quite a bit of money. So Tesla told them that because you believed in me and you backed me and allowed me to develop this. The AC motor and the AC electrical system, which we still enjoy today, because I'm gonna rip up my contract. I'm gonna give you back the patent. That's the kind of guy that Tesla was. Yeah. Well, and unfortunately, that all came back and bit him on the butt years later when he tried to bring online his system to send electricity without wires, and his backers found out what he was actually trying to do, and they couldn't see any way that they could make money off of that. How are we going to charge people to receive electricity from the atmosphere or from the ground. We're not quite sure just exactly how he was going to do it. So they not only did they pull their money from the project, they sued Tesla for the money that they had given him, and they started basically a bad word of mouth about him and told anybody else, don't work with this guy, he's crazy, he's just a charlatan, and he's going to steal your money, all the while continuing to make money off of his earlier patents and inventions. And that basically this took place in the early 1900s. And so that basically did him in. I mean, he had some minor successes through the rest of his life, but he never made the amount of money that he had earlier made, and plus his reputation had been, just completely destroyed.
Why did the government do that? I mean, were they afraid that he would give something away?
It wasn't the government. It wasn't the government. It was corporations. It was business.
Well, then why was the FBI down the hall from him then? Why was the government watching him towards the end?
Towards the end, Tesla was every year on his birthday. The newspapers in New York would interview Tesla, and they would ask him, like, what are you up to? What great inventions are you working on now, Dr. Tesla? And he would talk about these ideas that he had. Some of these ideas included his death beam, which he talked about in the 1930s, and he actually sold this idea to the Soviet Union. Basically, they were working with a front company that was in the United States, and the United States government knew this. It was not a big secret that this company was a front for the Soviet Union, and Tesla knew it as well. I mean, at the time, even though we didn't like communism, Russia was still against the Nazis. So Tesla sold this death beam idea to the Soviet Union, got a certain amount of money, and obviously the Soviet Union was happy with the results, because a couple of years later they gave him more money. Almost like a reward. Hey, this really worked. This worked really great. Here's more money. So even though Tesla had tried to convince the United States, Great Britain, some of the other allied powers, that he had these ideas for the death beam, radar, some of these other things, nobody expressed any open interest in working with Tesla. But obviously they were interested in what he was doing because of, like I said earlier, they kept a close watch on him through the FBI and the OSS, partially, probably not only for that, but also they knew that he could be an easy target for Germany or even the Soviet Union. Tesla's nephew was a diplomat from Yugoslavia, and with communist sympathies. And in fact, after the end of the war, his nephew joined the Yugoslavian Communist Party, and the U.S. government was well aware of his communist leanings. So I think that they were keeping a close eye on Tesla, not only interested in what he was working on, possibly maybe even secretly helping him a little bit, but also because I think that they were afraid that some other foreign power may try to either kill him, kidnap him, or continue to steal his work?
Well, wasn't he also involved with programs that would alter human behavior and things like that?
Somewhat. Now, he had worked, and this took place in, I mean, way back in, like I said, the early years of the 20th century. He worked on a resonance device. Which started out as nothing more than kind of like a steam-driven box that had a hammer in it that would basically, knock on something till it established a resonance with whatever it was knocking on, and eventually, once this resonance took place, you could bring down a building, a bridge, what have you. In his earlier work on this, he had developed kind of like a platform that would vibrate to certain frequencies. All right, and now Tesla was very good friends with the writer Mark Twain. And one time when Mark Twain was visiting Tesla, he wanted to know what this platform, did. And Tesla explained, what it did. And Mark Twain was interested. He says, okay, well, what happens? He goes, okay, we know what would happen. You put, say, like a model of a building on it, and it vibrates, and the building, falls down. What happens if a person is on this? And Tesla says, well, after so long of time, it loosens your bowels. And Mark Twain was like, oh, that's funny. I don't believe that. He goes, he says, I suffer all the time from constipation, and I don't believe something like that would ever fix, my problem. So Tesla said, well, get on it and let's see. So Mark Twain got onto this device, and it started vibrating, and after a while, Mark Twain's constipation was cured.
I'll be darned.
Now,
okay,
Tesla had also experimented with some ideas. Kind of going back to your what you had asked. He had worked on some ideas that certain radio frequencies could affect the brain. And this is something that we know now is true. At first he worked with say like AM frequencies. But Tesla was one of the first to actually work with microwaves as well, and he was actually able to determine that these various frequencies in microwaves could affect different areas of not only the brain, but the microwaves especially could affect portions of your inner ear that would produce sound isn't the correct word, because the sound, is, comes from the air vibrating, but actually the microwave would resonate the bones of your ear to imitate a sound. So Tesla theorized very early on that if you could modulate these microwave frequencies in such a way, you could make it seem like somebody was talking to you. Now, of course, it wasn't until years and years later that the CIA with their MK Ultra mind control experiments discovered that that's true, that you could actually do this. But this is something that Tesla was working on in the early 1900s. Once again, though, Tesla couldn't take these experiments very far because it was very difficult to produce microwaves that didn't fry your brain. You know, it was difficult. It was difficult to control the frequencies, and it was difficult to control how they were transmitted. You know, Tesla was one of the first ones to discover that microwaves could actually heat an object. Excite the molecules to the point that they actually, heat it up. But and this is one of the things that Tesla he couldn't see any use to that. So I mean I suppose he wasn't quite thinking along the lines of culinary delights with using microwaves. But it's like I had said earlier. There were a lot of things that Tesla was working on, or maybe accidentally ran across that he would write down, or his assistants would write down that here's an interesting side effect of such and such experiment, or this happened rather than this happened, and that's as far as it went. Either because Tesla lost interest, or he didn't have enough money to continue on with this interesting idea. Most of the time, it was just Tesla would lose interest, because Tesla had a tendency to bounce from one idea to the other, with the exception of things like. Go ahead.
No, I was. He was interested with contacting hidden dimensions and stuff like that. So there was I would say a spiritual part here, but I don't think it was even spiritual. I think it had to do with the fact that he believed that there were other dimensions, and that that there was a way of contacting those other dimensions at some point. I don't think it was spiritual as much as it was. There are these other places that that exist, and how do we connect to them and contact them?
Tesla saw the universe as being made up of fields of energy, which I mean, we now know that's pretty much correct. Now, Tesla, however, he didn't see eye to eye with Einstein and his theories of relativity. He also he didn't like the ideas of quantum mechanics, but I think that considering the era that Tesla grew up and worked in, I think there's a possibility that a lot of Tesla's theories on how the universe works probably it also involved what we now know as Einstein's theory of relativity, and then the theories of quantum mechanics. But it's kind of like the blind man looking at, or feeling an elephant. I mean, if you're focused on only one part of it, you fail to perceive the entirety of it. And I think that Tesla may have been focused due to his interest in, electricity and fields of energy, that, given enough time, his eyes would have been open more to these other aspects of how the universe works. I mean, he was kind of skirting around them when he was working on his own unified field theory, but he was never able to, at least as far as we know, he was never able to completely develop it. Who knows? It's like you said, if he had been born 100 years, into the future, such aspects of cosmology may have been readily apparent to him. But unfortunately, the era that he lived and worked in, again, he was hampered by technology, and he was hampered by scientific understanding of that time.
How old was he when he passed?
Oh, let's see. He was, I think, 85 or 87. So
wow.
I mean, he wasn't. I mean, he lived a pretty good long life, and he could have probably have lived longer, but a year or so before he passed away, he was hit by a cab in front of his hotel. He liked to go out every day with a bag of peanuts and feed the pigeons at a nearby park. He loved pigeons, which is so odd because he was a germaphobe. You had talked earlier about how he had certain eccentric habits. I mean, the only place that he would ever eat was the dining room of the New Yorker where he lived, because he knew that the cooks would prepare the meal to his specifications. Yet here he loved these birds that a lot of people consider rats with wings, and if he would find an injured one, he would take it back to his hotel and nurse it back to health. But unfortunately, one time when he was on his way to the park, as he was crossing the road, he was hit by a cab, and he was pretty severely injured. And I don't think that he ever quite completely recovered for it, even though his autopsy report says that he died of a heart attack. But as you said earlier, Barbara, I mean there are some people who are suspicious that Tesla may have been sent to the Summerland maybe a little bit early.
I suspect he was on the brink or the edge of something very major, and they just didn't want him to get there. And I believe he was a genius, an absolute genius, and quite often geniuses are not recognized in their time, and certainly he was not.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, there are still, I guess, things that Tesla was working on, that are still being worked on today by various laboratories like DARPA, trying to figure out just exactly what he was on to, and how he could make it work, and why they're not quite able to. I've heard from some very good sources that so many of Tesla's ideas are still being researched and developed, but unfortunately a lot of these ideas are being researched and developed for military purposes, which I find that just extremely sad. Not only because it that just goes completely against what Tesla was all about, but also because the rest of us may not ever know about these things. And you realize that if something is being developed to use, say, like the weapons capability, there are probably other aspects of it that can be used to benefit humanity as well. And the way that the military is, it may be 50 years before the beneficial aspects of whatever it is that they're working on, based on Tesla technology, it becomes known to the rest of us.
Well, I've read someplace that they're now using Tesla energy in a lot of the new material that's being developed, because certainly pulling energy out of the air is a lot easier than going to the gas station and stuff like that. I mean, if electric cars are being developed, why not use Tesla energy and then never have to fill them up?
Well, Tesla's transmitting tower that he built on Long Island in New York, that was going to be, the first of his energy transmission systems. It actually was going to be powered using conventional sources at the time, burning coal or things like that. However, Tesla had other ideas on devices that look somewhat like solar energy panels, but instead of solar energy, these things would have been used to bring in energy, like you said, right out of the atmosphere, right out of the ether. That universal energy that pervades across time and space. Tesla had some very interesting ideas along those lines. Earlier he called them cosmic rays, but he expanded on that idea that that the universe is just full. It's just full of energy. I can't right now. I can't come up with a better term for it. But this universal energy is all around us, and it permeates us, and it can be tapped into and utilized.
Yeah, that's what blows my mind. The thing that, all right, you can't charge for it, but the government could certainly use it. And sooner or later we'd be able to. But to have something that is that logical to use, why haven't they put it into production to some degree, to some way, so that it could benefit people? I mean, there are people in third world countries that it would help tremendously. And I can't imagine what other notebooks he has. They saved all of Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks, albeit they were written backwards in the mirror. But his stuff is he was weaponizing his stuff. Actually.
Right.
But he had a helicopter, and he had a submarine, and he had so many inventions, and he just had the fun of, writing them down and developing them and whatever. But Tesla was persecuted, really. And what a waste of an amazing mind. It's so frightening that it is wasteful, and the thought of a lot of his patents were never developed. I would imagine that now they're expired, so that you could pick up the patent for nothing and possibly develop it further.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that a lot of the reasons has to do with money. It's like you said, if you come up with a way to tap into a universal, almost unlimited energy source, this planet has an economy based on petroleum, basically. And that the concern is that it would completely devastate the economy. Of course, when they say the economy, it means a number of corporations whose CEOs makes millions and millions of dollars every year off the backs of the rest of us. So I think that's probably the prevalent reason why you don't see the development of these types of ideas. Of course, they use, this goes against the laws of thermodynamics or what have you. But we've all seen these interesting stories about these garage inventors coming up with some very interesting devices, and all of a sudden these guys are killed in a car accident, their house burns down. They die of an unexplained heart attack. Yeah.
We're real close to being through our 2 hours here. How can people get a hold of you if they want to get a hold of you, want to give out your website and stuff like that?
Sure. Well, I have a website that I share with Tim Beckley and the rest of the Global Communication crew. It's conspiracyjournal.com, and it's not just conspiracies. There's all kinds of interesting things: UFOs, the paranormal, cryptid creatures, all the stuff that we're interested in. All of my books, you can find them on Amazon, Just look up Tim Swartz or Tim R. Swartz. And I also have a webcast with Tim Beckley called Exploring the Bizarre. It's heard Thursday nights at 10 o'clock Eastern Time on the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
And you have a book coming out as well, I believe.
Oh, I always have books coming out. Right now, I am working with Tim Beckley and Sean Castile to put together a number of channeled writings over the, it's been decades that these writings, messages have been coming through from the alleged Ashtar Star Command. Ashtar group, right. So, yeah, well, I mean, there's been a number of books throughout the years, so we're trying to bring a lot of these books together into one, one big book, so you don't have to try to find, because a lot of these books have been long out of print. So we want to bring these back and let people read them again.
Well, I want to thank you so much for tonight. This has been great, and I look forward to having you back again soon sometime.
Well, thank you, Barbara. I had a great time, and I hope your audience enjoyed it as well.
Well, I do too, but it was fun for me, so, I'm pretty sure it was fun for them. Good night now.
Well, thank you. Good night.